Hey, welcome to Vector Wonderland, the big Geometry Nodes course. Welcome to part 3. In this part, we will have a closer look at how curves work inside of Geometry Nodes, and we will make a fairy light inside of it, and we will also make a procedural pathway inside of Geometry Nodes with the help of curves. And even more in the third episode of Vector Wonderland. Welcome to the third part of the Vector Wonderland, the big Geometry Nodes course of our winter season. In this third part, we will have a look at how curves work inside of Geometry Nodes, and we will look at how to make fairy lights and a pathway system, a procedural pathway system with the help of Geometry Nodes and with curves. Without further ado, let's hop into Blender. For this series, we will be using the 3.4 Blender version. You can download it via the Blender website, or I have here the Blender launcher, but it should be irrelevant from where you have it, but it has to be the 3.4 Blender version. So we will launch that. As said, you can also download it via the blender.org and install it. And here we have the incredible charge short from Blender. Definitely check that out if you want to have it. It's a really cool short of Blender, from the Blender Studio. Here we are inside of Blender, and maybe know a little bit about curves already. So there are two ways of adding curves inside of Blender. So first of all, delete everything, please, as always. And there are two ways of adding curves. So at first, if you haven't watched the first two parts, I recommend doing that, because this is a great course for beginners to learn Geometry Nodes, and we will have a little look, and those two videos help you more out on learning Geometry Nodes. In the third part, we will of course work off of the first two parts. So as we already know, we have here the Geometry Nodes editor, and here we can, for instance, add the default cube, and we can click on new. And we have now in Blender two ways of adding curves. First of all, in the 3D viewport by pressing Shift and A for adding new objects. We have here the curve submenu, and here we can add, for instance, a Bezier curve like this, and then we can go into edit mode and edit our Bezier curve like this. There's a second way of adding a curve, and this is inside of Geometry Nodes. So we know we have here the data in our group input that is coming in, which is the mesh from the edit mode, which is the cube. But we don't want to have the cube, and we can just disconnect this here, and we can add new geometry inside of our Geometry Nodes. So because we have here also, by pressing Shift A, we can go into the add menu, but you can also go here on the left top to add new nodes. It's the same. We can also add curves inside of Geometry Nodes. For this, you have to press Shift A, and here we have the curve submenu and the curve primitives. We have also the curve topology, but we won't go into this today. So we mainly will focus for now on the curve primitives, because here we can add new nodes, a new type of curves, curve objects. The curve primitives are all basic curve objects that we can use, and then the curve submenu above. There are a lot of nodes. Don't be afraid. You don't need them all. And those are all nodes that can manipulate your basic curve mesh, which is the curve primitive. Curve object. And for instance, we have here curve objects like the Bezier curve. You can see it by dragging it into the group output. Looks like this. And we have here something like a simple circle. And you can change resolution, of course, if you want to have also a triangle or whatever you want. And we have here also a simple curve line, which we will use later. And this curve line has basic 2 points that we can control And we have also a spiral, which is very interesting. We don't have this in the 3D viewport. And of course, we can also change the resolution on this one and a bunch of other parameters that you can watch on your own. I won't explain those things in here. The last thing is, of course, so we have also a rectangle-like thing that we can play around with. And the last thing is, of course, the star, which is also very cool. And you can use this for really cool things and change the parameters however you like. You can also twist it to gain certain effects. But for now, we will focus on making fairy lights inside of geometry nodes. So for this, we want to use a curved line and then build off of that. So of course we add new nodes with Shift A, as we've learned in the last 2 episodes. And we want to have a new curve. So we go into the curve primitives, and here we search for the curve line and just add it here. And it is a new object, so we don't need the data from our original cube here. So we just have to connect it to the group output. And here is now our new curve. Yay! So now we have the start and the end point, but we want to have those 2 points controlled by 2 empties. So let's add those. So like this, just in the viewport, Shift A, and then here on the empty plane axis, just 2 empties. So empties are objects that don't get rendered. Those are just basic handles that you can use in your viewport. And we want to use those 2 now to create our curve line exactly from this empty to this empty. And then we can change it in the viewport. How can we do this? We need to go in our geometry nodes tree. And here we have to define for the start point we want to have the location from this empty. And for the end point, we want to use the location of the other empty. How can we do this? We need to import information from our other 2 objects, the empties, into our geometry node tree. For this, we can drag and drop our empties inside of here. And here we already have the location outputted. And as a reminder, always use relative if you want to use the current position and not the original position. So now we can use on our first empty the location as our start point. And now you can see we are already changing the position if we use our empty. And of course for the end point, we want to have the other empty and set it to relative, and we want to use the location on the end. And now we have a nice control here in our viewport. This is already really cool thing that we can do inside of geometry nodes, and it's basic like that. But now we want to have little lights on our nice fairy light. And how can we do this? We want to instance on our curve. This is still a curve, not a fairy light, it's a curve. And we can instance on those curves other objects, like for instance, as we now do icospheres. So with Shift A, we can go into the geometry, into the instances, of course, and here instance on points. And we can grab that. And now everything is gone, but that's because we instance nothing on our points, so nothing gets shown. Of course, we want to add a mesh primitive, an icosphere. And we can use that as an instance. We can scale this down. And now you can see we have only 2 points. Why is that? So that's something that is basic in the curve line, because the curve line only has 2 points. We need to somehow higher up the points of our curve. How can we do this? We need to manipulate our curve line. And we've learned, we have here in the add menu the curve primitives, and then we have the curve nodes that manipulate our curve. And here we have a node like, where is it? The resample curve node. With this, we can add more curves to our, more points to our curve. In this case, 10 points. And we can, of course, always higher and lower it like this. But for now, we take 10 points. But now we run into one problem, because if we stretch our line, we always have only 10 points, but we want to have a certain distance between the points. So we have to change the resample curve node from count to length. And let's higher up this threshold. And now if we drag this, our points always have the same length. And the further our empty is away, the more points we have. And this is a nice thing to get some kind of consistency. But now we can see our points of our icospheres are floating somehow, and our original curve is gone. So for this we can join our original curve back in. We can do this by going into the geometry submenu, and we can use the join geometry node. Where is it? Here. And we can join our original curve back in. I will make some reroutes here, so you don't freak out. But now the thing is, we have only the curve, we don't have actual geometry or mesh data. And so we need to convert this curve line to a mesh here so we can see it. And for this, we need to go into the curve submenu, because we want to manipulate on our original curve line. And here on the top, we have the curve to mesh node. And this node converts our curve to a mesh. And we can also define a profile curve. In this case, we will take a curve primitive, a curve circle, as our profile curve. And this circle now gets drawn around our original curve. It looks strange because it's way too big. We need to use it something like this. Maybe half of that. Maybe lower the resolution so it's more performant. Now, the last thing we can do is we want to have the curve bending down so that there's gravity. How can we do this? We can use our curve data here that we've resampled, and we can change the position on our curve points. And for this, we need the set position node. So this is a node where whenever you want to need the position of something, you need this node. And let's connect this also here on the top. We don't need this. And we want to now bend this to the ground in the middle more than on the outside. And for this, we need to have the information from the length of our curve. How can we do this? So first of all, we want to split this vector value. So we grab in the vector the combine XYZ node. So now we have a float for every single axis. We can work better with that. Let's collapse this here. So again, you guys don't get crazy. Again, how can we now get the length of our curve? For this, there's a node, of course, and it's also in the curve submenu. It is the spline parameter. And the spline parameter is a node which gives us at the beginning of the curve a value of 1, and the end of the curve is a value of 0, and all the points in the middle get automatically generated. So 0.5 in the middle, and so on and so forth. And we can use the factor for the z-axis. Now you can see at the beginning it's a value of 0, so our curve gets added 0 on the z-axis and at the end a value of 1. So our curve gets a set position of +1 at the end in the z-axis. But now we don't want to have it like this. We want to have it in the middle -1 and at the end again 0. So it's like a U shape. And we can easily do this with a float curve like this. And here we can take this down. So it's interestingly very similar to our curve here. And we can drag this up. And of course it's going up right now, and this is because we have to flip this with a math node. So just search it, math, and with a multiplication of -1. So we invert it basically. And now you can see we have gravity, and you can of course always change it and make also other funny things with it. And now of course we are in geometry nodes and it's all procedural, so you can change everything in here. The last thing we want to do inside of geometry nodes, first of all, higher up the subdivision of our balls, and we want to lower our points here a little bit because the cable isn't going through our lights, at least not on my fairy lights. And for this it's very simple. We just have to use an transform node and just take them a little bit down like this, and now it looks way better, right? Now for the shading, we can use for our curve here on the top, we want to set a material. So create a material first. So for the cable, like this, we want to have it metallic and not that rough. And then we want to have the lights, so create another material, light, duplicate your set material node and make it a light. So that's using our points here. We want to have them emissive, like this. And it's not working because I have to use the light. And so the very last thing we want to have is we want to have random color for every single light. For this we can go into the shader editor, and here we can use, for instance, an RGB, just a simple color, plug it into the emission, just choose some kind of color. And I want to enable the bloom so it looks nice like this. And we now want to have the hue saturation node, just search it, and we want to have a random value for every single point, so we can change the hue depending on the random color. So every point then has a random color. For this we can use in the input, we want to use the object info node, and here we want to use the random into the hue. And now you can see, yay! And of course you can always change this here. And this is our first thing we can make with curves inside of geometry nodes. And let's delete everything. Sad, but you can save it if you want to. But for this tutorial I won't save it. The second thing we want to make is a little pathway. And for this we can use a plane, scale it up like 10 times. You can leave it, it's irrelevant. So now we want to go into the geometry nodes editor, like here. And we want to now make a little displacement on our plane. How can we do this? First of all, we need to subdivide mesh a bunch of times, and then we need to set a position. So as said, this is a node we need every time we want to use the position of something, and in this case we want to displace to make some hills. So we need to change the position of our vertices or faces. And so we want to use a noise texture to define the z height of our plane. For this, we want to combine, so it's in the vector, combine xyz node to split our vector into floats. And we want to use the noise texture on the z-axis. And of course, it's way too small, so we need to higher up the radius. So we need to lower the scale, maybe something like this, or a bit higher. This should work. But now we want to have a curve in our 3D viewport. So let's add a curve, a bezier. And so let's use here a color ramp to crank up the contrast of our texture a little bit. And we don't want it that high. So maybe something like this. But now we want to have a bezier curve here. And I scale it up a little bit. And in the near of this bezier curve, we don't want to have any displacement because this should be a pathway. Then we also want to have snow, and on our pathway we don't want to have snow. How can we do this now? So in our geometry node tree, we need the distance position of our bezier curve. So at first we need to have in general the information of our bezier curve, so we have to drag it with drag and drop inside of our geometry node tree, and here set it to relative, so it takes the current position and not the original. And here we want to use the distance of our curve to our plane. How can we do this? There's of course a node for this. It's in the geometry submenu, the geometry proximity node, and plug the geometry into the target. And now with the distance output, we can define if our plane gets displaced or if it not. So we can use a vector math node, vector math, set to scale, and we can plug the distance into the scale. And now we can see something strange, and here's an error. What does it tell us? Input geometry has unsupported type a curve. So of course we have to convert our curve to a mesh like this. Now it also not works because now our curve is an edge, and we are only using the proximity of faces, so we have to set it to edges. And now we can see, hey, it works. So we can edit this. Nice. And we can of course use a color ramp to define the contrast of this thing. And you have your own great path that you can also always change here in the edit mode like this. And now as a little bonus, we also want to have snow on here. So we want to distribute points on our faces here. And let's view this with the viewer and leave our group output here on the bottom. We want to convert our points to a volume. The radius should be of course a little smaller. And we want to have a lot of points. And at the end, we want to convert this volume back to a mesh like this. And this is how you can create really quick a little bit of snow. And you can higher up the voxel amount. And now we can join it back in with our original geometry. So let's grab a join geometry node and let's use it like this. And now we want to have our point radius where the curve, so our pathway, is very small. So we can use our geometry proximity data on our voxel radius. Now you can see it's very, very big, and that's because we are outputting here a 1. So let's grab a map range really quick and let's turn down our max value here. Make it very, very small. Maybe something like this. And you can play around with this a little bit. Maybe something like this. And now you can see we have our own procedural pathway here. And the last thing that you may want to have is your snow smooth shaded, because it's blocky right now. So you can go into the mesh submenu, and here is the set position node. And now everything is smooth shaded. And to keep this tutorial now short, I will not do the material again. I showed you how to make different materials for different parts of your geometry node tree. And it is here again in the material submenu, the set material node. And we did it in the fairy light example. So with this third part, I will leave you now on learning the world of curves inside of geometry nodes. And I would be very happy if I can see you again on the fourth part of this series, where we will make a great Christmas tree as final of this series. And if you want to support me, I have if you're searching for great materials, I have a procedural material pack with over 300 materials that is on Gumroad. There's also a free version of it, so you can download it for free and use it everywhere you want. You can name me if you want to use it on products, but it's free. And there's also an advanced version with really professional materials that I made. You can check that out. The link is in the description. And yes, thank you all for watching, and I hope you liked this little tutorial about curves, and hopefully see you in the next episode. Bye!